Okay, I gotta call you back. I'm about to have Bible study.
Why?
Cause I'm saved. And I read the word. Because it's important to know the word. How else we gonna battle all these demons and witchcraft? How else you gonna do it?
There are other books.
Girl, get off of my phone, girlfriend. Get off of my phone. I'll call you back.
I mean, that book was written by a racist white
girl, goodbye, girl. I'll call you in an hour. Y'all, let me get out of the mama. She be on the same room with Kimberly.
When Tamar opened her mouth this time, it wasn't noise. It wasn't the messy clip people expected to scroll past. It was sharp, deliberate, and haunting. She carried herself like a woman who had already been broken, already patched herself up, and finally decided to show the scars. This wasn't a tantrum. It was testimony. And the subject of that testimony wasn't fame or gossip. It was family. She painted the early picture everyone thought they knew, a preacher father guiding a household with hymns. A mother running rehearsals like a general. Daughters raised in unison under the roof of church discipline. From the outside, it was a miracle story, little girls harmonizing in pews who turned into women harmonizing on stages. But then Tamar pressed on the seam and made everyone look again. Because in the middle of that success story was a silence that never got explained. The silence belonged to Traci. According to Tamar, it wasn't random that Traci was always on the side. It wasn't coincidence that her voice rarely made it to the front mic. She suggested it was structural, that someone decided one sister would carry the burden so the others could carry the brand. And when she said the word sacrifice, people froze. That word changes everything. It doesn't mean sibling rivalry. It means a deal. It means somebody paid the price so the spotlight could keep shining. And the one who paid, she claimed, was Traci. Suddenly the reruns looked different. What once seemed like petty banter, side-eye jokes, and exaggerated reality TV drama now looks like evidence. Every time Traci was laughed at for being difficult. Every time she was cut out of a scene or given the label of outsider. It reads like a receipt in a ledger no one wanted to open, Tamar described. How she turned to prayer as an anchor. Building small circles of faith when everything else felt chaotic. Instead of support, she says she got ridicule. Her Bible study group, her prayer hands, her moments of surrender, all mocked. She said her big sister Toni, the very woman who once built her name on gospel roots, dismissed scripture like a punchline, claiming it was a book written by racist men. For Tamar, that wasn't a disagreement. That was sabotage. Imagine leaning on God to keep your sanity and being laughed at by your own blood. That's not just conflict. That's betrayal. And when fans looked back, they remembered that Toni had already admitted in her memoir she once faked speaking in tongues to please her parents. That revelation, combined with Tamar's story, reframed everything. One sister leaned harder into faith. The other allegedly mocked it, and stuck in between was Traci. A woman who clung to God quietly even as her place in the family shrank smaller and smaller. The chilling part comes when Tamar connected her own near-death spirals to this culture of dismissal. She spoke about waking up injured, in blood, with memory gaps and missing teeth. She suggested it wasn't coincidence that these things happened when she tried to break silence, when she tried to expose what she called the cult-like control around her. Fans didn't brush it off this time. They started connecting dots, the shaved head, the breakdowns, the cryptic posts, the hospitalizations. These weren't just random collapses. They were patterns. Patterns that lined up disturbingly with the way Traci was sidelined. When Traci needed her family most, battling illness, asking for respect, she was met with cameras instead of comfort. And when she passed, Tamar now suggests, the grief was handled with more branding than truth. Her language is dangerous because it forces fans to see the Braxton story not as a gospel fairy tale but as a survival economy. In Tamar's telling, loyalty is purchased with silence, and those who don't comply are isolated. She said Tawanda only answers the phone when the cameras roll, that day-to-day connection is withheld like punishment. She spoke of outsiders barging into her prayer space, video leaks of moments that should have been sacred. She painted a portrait of control where even faith itself is policed, mocked, or disrupted if it doesn't serve the larger narrative. And sitting at the center of that system, she claimed, is Toni, the glamorous icon. The face of the family, the one who cashed in credibility while Traci was quietly left carrying the pain. Fans who loved Toni's voice felt conflicted. Almost guilty, because Tamar wasn't asking them to hate her. She was asking them to see the cost. She said it wasn't just career choices or bad timing. It was deliberate marginalization. Traci wasn't just unlucky. She was chosen to be left out. And that's why the word sacrifice hurt so badly. If that's true, then every standing ovation and every award sits under a shadow. Every trophy glitters with a question, whose pain made this possible? Tamar didn't let herself off the hook. She admitted she's been sharp, messy, reactive. She said her breakdowns weren't pretty and her responses weren't perfect. But she refused to believe that justified a culture of silence. She argued that families aren't tested on how they celebrate you on stage. They're tested on whether they pick you up when you can't stand. And when she collapsed, she said the silence from her sisters was louder than any prayer. Fans remembered the Instagram posts, the birthday wishes, the surface-level kindness. Tamar said those weren't kindness. Those were PR gestures. If love is real, she argued, it shows up in private, not just online. The heaviest moment in her telling came when she circled back to Traci's final years. A woman of undeniable talent, stripped of full opportunity, battling illness with grace, still asking for love. Tamar said she deserved more than sympathy in hindsight. She deserved solidarity in real time. She remembered how Traci begged for respect on camera, how she cried about being excluded, how her hurt was turned into content. And now, with her gone, Tamar demands people stop calling it sibling bickering. Call it what it was, a system that fed itself on one sister's silence. That's why Tamar is being called a whistleblower, even if she stands alone. She is risking her own sanity, her own career, her own relationships to make people see what she calls the real Braxton legacy. Not unity, not harmony, but control, silence, and sacrifice. And she says Traci was the lamb. She asks, if one sister's suffering kept the others at the table, what does that make of the whole feast? Her words left the internet in chaos. Some fans defended Toni, saying she carried the family financially and emotionally for years. Others sided with Tamar, pointing to clips, quotes, and memoir passages that seemed to confirm the fracture. But even those who didn't want to believe her couldn't shake the unease. Because the question now isn't whether the Braxtons fought, everyone knew that. The question is whether the fights were cover for something calculated. And if Traci was sacrificed, what does that mean for the sisters who survived? Tamar has warned she isn't finished. She told her fans the worst is still hidden, that she can't wait until the day she can tell everything. That promise hangs heavy, like thunder in a sky already split with lightning. If the first revelation was that Traci's exclusion wasn't coincidence, then what could be worse? Fans are afraid for her. They see the hospital visits, the breakdowns, the cryptic posts, and they wonder if she'll even live long enough to drop the rest of the truth. And that fear only adds weight to her claim, silence is deadly. She says silence killed Traci. And if she stays silent, it could kill her too. So she speaks, trembling but unrelenting. She tells the world to stop worshipping the image and start listening to the pain. She demands that people understand fame is scaffolding, not shelter, and a sister is worth more than a brand. She asks why prayers have to be mocked to keep records selling, why one sister had to be erased so the others could harmonize. And she ends with the haunting truth no one wants to hear: if Traci was sacrificed once, then silence ensures it will happen again. When Tamar went live again, she didn't sound like someone ranting for attention. She sounded like someone keeping a promise. She had already told the world that Traci's silence wasn't just an accident of life, it was a pattern. But now she went deeper, pulling the threads that connect her own trauma to her sister's erasure. She began with a question: why is it that every time she leaned closer to God, chaos followed? Why did Bible study lead to mockery, prayer circles get sabotaged, and faith itself become a punchline in her own home? For Tamar, it wasn't bad luck. It was proof that the moment she stopped playing along with the script, she became a problem to be contained. And when she became a problem, the consequences were brutal. She recounted the moments the public already knew, the breakdowns, the overdose scare, the times she disappeared into hospitals. But she added details fans hadn't heard. She described waking up in fear, not knowing what had happened the night before, bleeding and broken, unable to remember where the pain came from. She called those nights warnings. Not accidents, not coincidences, but signals. Signals that speaking too loud, praying too boldly, and resisting too openly came with consequences. And when she cried out for family, she says what came back wasn't compassion but silence. That silence, she insisted, told its own story. She wasn't being protected, she was being punished. Fans listening started making their own connections. They thought about Traci, how often she sat quietly while her sisters debated. How many times her pleas for respect were cut down with laughter. How she was branded as angry when she was simply desperate to be heard. In Tamar's telling, those weren't just bad edits. They were part of the same system that left her alone in her pain. Traci was the test case, the first to be sidelined. And when she passed, that same system turned its focus on Tamar. She pointed at Tawanda with blunt honesty. Not out of hatred, but out of exhaustion. She described how Tawanda could talk daily to the other sisters but leave her messages unanswered for weeks. To Tamar, that wasn't oversight. That was design. That was punishment through isolation. Because in families like this, she said, silence is a weapon sharper than words. If you don't play by the rules, you don't get the comfort of belonging. It's exile without the drama, a quiet kind of cruelty that leaves you doubting yourself, and she pointed again at Toni, not just as a sister but as a symbol. She reminded fans how Toni openly wrote in her book that she faked faith as a child, that she found church suffocating, that she pretended to speak in tongues just to please her parents. That admission, paired with her alleged mocking of Tamar's Bible study, paints a picture of someone who walked away from faith and then tore it down for anyone who dared hold on to it. For Tamar, that wasn't just about religion. That was about control. If faith is mocked, then obedience is demanded. And if obedience is demanded, there's no room for rebellion. The irony is that while the world saw Toni as the polished star, the Grammy-winning legend who carried the Braxton name into arenas, Tamar painted her as the enforcer of an unspoken bargain. One sister shines, another suffers. One builds a career, another is kept in the shadows. And when Tamar tried to flip that script by speaking up, the same cold machinery came for her too. That's why she used the word cult. Not because she was being dramatic, but because she believed silence, control, and sacrifice were the pillars holding the Braxton legacy up. Fans online started pulling receipts. Old clips of Traci crying, scenes where she begged to be included, interviews where she admitted she felt left out. When paired with Tamar's live, those clips no longer looked like TV drama. They looked like documentation. Proof that what was being called family unity was, in fact, a managed performance. And when fans rewatched those moments where Toni rolled her eyes at Tamar's faith or dismissed her pain, they saw something more chilling, not sibling teasing, but strategy. Strategy that kept control intact. The most heartbreaking part came when Tamar talked about Traci's final wishes. She claimed that Traci wanted nothing more than to reunite her sisters one last time on stage, to sing together like they were meant to from the beginning. But that never happened. The silence was never broken. The circle was never repaired. And when Traci passed, the opportunity was gone forever. To Tamar, that was proof. Proof that love had conditions, that legacy meant more than healing, and that one sister's heart could be sacrificed for the image of the rest. She then turned the spotlight on herself, admitting how much she had been made into the scapegoat. She said every breakdown she had was used as evidence against her, every hospital stay spun into proof that she was unstable, every cry for help turned into a headline instead of a hug. And yet, she argued, her pain was never about her alone. It was connected to the system that already devoured Traci. That's why she kept speaking. Because if she stayed silent, she said, she would end up like her sister, erased. She reminded fans of the night her prayer circle was infiltrated, how what was meant to be holy became content for blogs. She called it sabotage. She said it showed her that even her most sacred spaces weren't safe. And when Toni allegedly refused to hold hands in prayer, it didn't just sting. It confirmed everything she feared. That unity was for show. That behind the camera, the circle was already broken. The weight of her confession wasn't just about family secrets. It was about the industry itself. She hinted that what happened in her home mirrored what happens in the music business at large. Stars controlled, faith mocked, individuality erased, sacrifices made in silence so the machine keeps running. And when she shaved her head, when she posted cryptic symbols, when she whispered about demons and witchcraft, she wasn't being dramatic. She was signaling that she was trapped in the same system, and that her sisters were part of it.by now. The fans weren't just listening. They were terrified. They compared Tamar's experiences to Britney Spears, to other artists who spoke about being controlled. They pulled up images of butterflies, one-eye covers, breakdowns, and hospitalizations, matching them to patterns they'd seen before. And suddenly, Tamar's story didn't sound like exaggeration. It sounded like evidence. The most painful irony was that while Tamar clung to God to survive, her family allegedly mocked her for it. And while Traci leaned on faith quietly until her final days, her family left her to fight alone. That's why Tamar's use of the word sacrifice hit so hard. It wasn't just metaphor. It was accusation. It was saying, one sister's suffering kept the rest safe. She ended her live with a haunting warning. She said she's still holding back. That the world hasn't heard the worst yet. That what has come out so far, the prayer circle, the Bible mockery, the injuries, the silence, is only the beginning. And she promised that one day, when she's ready, she will tell everything. That promise sent chills down timelines. Because if this was only the surface, what could possibly be beneath it? For now, fans are left torn. Some refuse to believe Toni could ever sacrifice her sister. Others can't ignore the receipts piling up. But no matter which side they're on, everyone agrees on one thing: the Braxton legacy will never look the same. Because Tamar has dragged the conversation out of family dinners and reunion sets and into the open. She has made the world ask the question no one wanted to ask: if Traci was the sacrifice, then who's next? And as she keeps speaking, trembling but unstoppable, the air around her feels heavy with risk. She's fighting not just for her own name, but for her sister's memory. And that makes her dangerous. Because a woman who has already lost everything has nothing left to protect but the truth. By the time Tamar returned to speak again, the world was no longer listening with curiosity, it was listening with dread. She had already told them that Traci's silence was no accident, that faith was mocked, that pain was ignored, and that she herself had been punished for daring to pray out loud. She had shown them patterns, connected the dots, and forced people to rewatch years of footage through new eyes. But in this final round, she shifted the weight of her words. No longer was she only exposing betrayal. She was warning that the story wasn't finished. That what people thought was the end of the Braxton tragedy might only be the beginning. She began by revisiting the way grief had been handled when Traci passed. To fans, it was heartbreaking but dignified, tributes posted, interviews given, legacies celebrated. But to Tamar, it was hollow. She said it looked polished on the outside but felt empty on the inside. The photos and captions didn't match the silence she remembered in the hospital, the lack of daily presence when it mattered most. And that, she said, is the problem with families who choose image over intimacy. They know how to perform unity, but they don't know how to practice it. For Tamar, the betrayal wasn't just that Traci was left out in life, it was that even in death, the truth was dressed up so no one would question it. She confessed that grief had made her reckless. That there were nights she didn't think she would survive, mornings where she didn't recognize her own reflection. But she also said that grief gave her clarity. It forced her to look at the system around her with no illusions. She realized the same culture that excluded Traci was the one that kept her silenced, hospitalized, and doubting herself. And she decided she couldn't allow the story to close politely, with hashtags and memorials. She said the story had to be told raw, even if it burned bridges forever. Then she dropped something heavier. She said that what people had seen so far, the prayer circles sabotaged, the Bible mocked, the cold shoulders, the unexplained injuries, was only a surface layer. Beneath it, she hinted, there were darker truths she wasn't ready to release. I can't wait until I can tell y'all, she repeated, her voice trembling not with anger but with fear. That line made fans shiver. If what she had already revealed felt unbearable, what could possibly be worse? What could she be holding back that terrified her this much? The fear in her tone made it clear, whatever it was personal, and it was close. She spoke about control, about how families can become their own prisons. She said the Braxton name had become both a blessing and a curse, a passport to fame but also a chain around the neck. Every smile on camera, every sisterhood moment, she said, was rehearsed to keep the machine alive. And if one sister refused to comply, that sister was branded, isolated, or erased. She said Traci was the first to pay that price, and she feared she might be next. Not just in terms of reputation, but in terms of survival. She confessed that every time she tried to tell more, something happened, another health scare, another breakdown, another silence that nearly killed her. She asked fans to see the pattern, every time I get close, something tries to take me out. Her words pulled the internet into a frenzy. People combed through old episodes again, looking for signs of scripting, signs of manipulation, signs that Traci had been deliberately sidelined. They replayed clips where Toni dismissed Tamar's faith, where Tawanda ignored her cries, where Traci sat with tears in her eyes while the others laughed. And suddenly, those clips didn't feel like entertainment anymore. They felt like warnings that nobody caught at the time. Tamar reminded them of the night she shaved her head, the symbolism fans dissected endlessly. To her, it wasn't fashion. It was freedom. She said it was the only way she could reclaim her body from forces that kept trying to own it, family pressure, industry contracts, spiritual warfare. She called it a baptism of sorts, a way to wash off the lies. And yet, even that act was mocked by some of her own sisters. She said the mockery didn't hurt because it was mean. It hurt because it proved her point, the circle was broken. When one sister seeks healing, the others ridicule instead of embrace. That, she said, was the real cult-like control, love conditioned on compliance. She spoke about her fans, how they had become her lifeline. She said strangers showed her more compassion than blood sometimes did. That when she collapsed, it was the outpouring of prayers from people she'd never met that kept her alive, not the scripted well-wishes from her family. She said that's why she would keep telling the story, no matter the cost. Because silence had already taken Traci, and silence had nearly taken her. Speaking was the only way left to survive. The most devastating moment came when she turned back to Toni. She didn't call her a monster. She didn't demonize her. Instead, she called her tragic. She said Toni was a woman who had gained the world but lost the foundation. A woman who could fill stadiums but couldn't sit in a prayer circle. A woman who carried Grammys but, in Tamar's eyes, couldn't carry her sister when she needed her most. She said it plainly, what good is success if it costs your blood? That question echoed online for days. Because deep down, fans knew there was no easy answer. Then she turned to Traci one last time, her voice breaking. She said her sister was more than the outsider label she was given. She was a woman of power, of voice, of presence. She said the world saw glimpses of her greatness, but not enough. And she swore she would never let her be remembered as the sister left behind. She would be remembered as the sister sacrificed. That word again. Sacrifice. The word that refuses to let anyone look away. She closed with a warning, not just to her family but to anyone listening. She said secrets destroy from the inside. That legacies built on silence eventually collapse. That truth always finds a way to speak, whether through the living or the dead. And then she left the question hanging in the air, heavy and haunting. If Traci was sacrificed, if Tamar is now the target, then who will the system come for next? Fans sat with that question like a weight on their chest. Because once you start seeing patterns of sacrifice, you can't unsee them. Every award looks different, every reunion hug looks suspicious, every smile feels rehearsed. And the Braxton legacy, once celebrated as harmony, now sits under suspicion as tragedy. As the live ended, Tamar's face lingered in the minds of those watching. Tired, bruised, but unafraid. She had risked her health, her career, her relationships, and maybe even her life just to say what no one else would. And whether people believed her or not, one thing was undeniable: the Braxton story would never be the same again.